Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. My name is Russell Brooks, tonight's host of Inside Scoop. Tonight's program will focus on the upcoming election in Virginia and the efforts to ensure the right to vote is protected. Joining me tonight is Megan Challender, the chair of the Election Law and Voter Protection Committee for the Fairfax County Democrats. In her role, she recruits and trains Democratic poll observers to ensure voter access. Megan has previously worked and volunteered on campaigns in Virginia, Kansas, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia. In 2020, she served as the Voter Protection Director for the Democratic Party in her home state of Kansas. Megan holds a bachelor's in political science from Kansas State University, a JD from the University of the District of Columbia, and a master's of laws in advocacy from Georgetown University Law Center. In addition to her campaign experience, Megan works as the legal director for a local nonprofit organization. Megan, welcome to Inside Scoop.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here tonight.
You've been involved in voter protection for quite some time. How did you get started in this area of politics, and why is it necessary, both in Virginia and elsewhere?
Sure. So first, I would love to just talk about what voter protection is, and then I'll talk about what sort of drew me to voter protection. So voter protection, the goal of it is really to make sure that every voter can register to vote and stay registered, can cast a ballot and have it counted, and can cast that ballot free of intimidation. So the voter protection program, the voter access program, really is focused on making sure that people can have free, easy access to the ballot as eligible voters. So I was drawn to this, and I had started out as a volunteer for many Democratic campaigns when I was in college and a young adult. But when I was in law school, I learned about voter protection and poll observation, and I thought it seemed like a great way to use my law degree to make sure that people's civil rights are protected, their voting rights are protected. And it's been a lot of fun making sure that that vote is preserved, and now I started out on Democratic hotlines taking questions from voters. Am I still registered to vote? Where can I vote near me? Things like that. And then began poll observing, watching the vote in action. And these days I get to train poll observers on the voting process, educate voters on the voting process, and it's a lot of fun, and it's such an important cornerstone of the United States, our right to vote.
What problems have you seen in your experience in Virginia?
I've seen a variety of problems, but first I just want to say that typically people don't experience problems voting, right? Most voters go to the polls and have an easy, efficient process. We have excellent election officers in the state of Virginia who make sure that that happens. And so I want to say that first before I focus on some of the ways that voting can go wrong, right? Because most importantly, what we want in voter protection and voter access is for voting to be easy and efficient and kind of boring, if I'm being honest, that it's just something you can do, you can get your I voted sticker and be proud. But I have seen some important problems come up. And one of those things that I saw during the 2021 gubernatorial election in Virginia, I was a poll observer, and the poll observer from the other party was standing up every single time a person of color was checking in at the voting booth or at the poll pad, and standing right behind the election official as they were there. And that was really disturbing and upsetting to me. And so that was quickly resolved. I brought a question up to the chief election officer in that polling place, and I said, you know, I don't think that she should be behaving that way, and it was quickly resolved, no problem at all, right, in the end. But it could have been something that caused voters to feel intimidated, to feel uncomfortable in the polling place, and again, our goal on the voter protection team is to make sure that voting is free, easy, and that there's no intimidation or fear in the process.
Are there other tactics that people pursue in order to intimidate voters or sort of deter them from actually voting?
So we see a lot of efforts at voter suppression. And voter suppression is, the goal of that is to make sure, or to try to get people to not turn out, right, to vote, that to make them feel like their vote doesn't matter, that their vote doesn't count, that there's no point. And I just want to counter that, of course, and say that voting really does matter. This is your way to make sure that your vote is, and your voice is heard in our democratic society. And so we all hear those messages, right, that about voter fraud or about, sort of other statements made particularly by the president, or the ex-president, President Trump. And really those efforts are to intimidate voters and make them feel like our democratic process doesn't matter, and it does matter. So I really want to encourage people to check their voter registration, to make their plan to vote, and to make sure that their voice is heard.
You mentioned voter fraud, and we hear that term utilized pretty much constantly. But I have to ask, is voter fraud a real issue, a real problem here in Virginia or elsewhere?
It is not. Voter fraud is not a real problem. There are many studies to demonstrate that voter fraud is simply not a real issue. Voters should feel confident that when they cast their ballot that it will be counted. And they should feel confident that the only people who are voting are eligible voters who get one vote, right? We all just get one vote. And so many studies have shown that voter fraud is really not a problem. Another thing that is a question that we get is about non-citizen voting. And again, this is a problem that really does not actually exist. It's something that people fear, that makes a good headline, but it's simply not the case. Only citizens can vote, and that has been the law in the United States since 1996. And it is well enforced by our registrars and election administrators to make sure that we have clean voting rolls.
So I have to ask, why would a party feel that it's in their interest to prevent people from voting?
Sure. So the simple reason is that voter suppression, especially in a state like Virginia, that's a purple state, suppressing the vote of the opposite party can help them win elections. It's a political maneuver, and it is about trying to win elections through means that are not free and fair, right? When we vote, when Democrats vote, we win. When we get our voters out to the polls, when they believe that their vote counts and that it matters, we win elections in Virginia. And so you see on the other side an attempt to make people feel that their vote doesn't matter, that it won't count, to make them afraid of voting, to encourage them to vote later. And we want to really counter that and really encourage people to check their registration, always important to do, to make their plan to vote and to vote early.
You mentioned that Virginia is a purple state, and so therefore maybe the elections are highly competitive. Is it less of a problem, this controversy about voter fraud, maybe in your home state of Kansas, where there are far fewer Democrats?
Well, again, voter fraud isn't happening in Kansas, and it's not happening in Virginia. But voter suppression is happening everywhere. Because even if in my home state of Kansas that is quite red, there's still voter suppression efforts in areas that are bluer, like Kansas City and Wichita, to try and discourage folks from voting, to make it harder for English language learners to cast a ballot, things like that.
Okay. So what are the goals then of your voter protection program here in Virginia as we move toward the upcoming election?
Yeah, so our goals are simple. Again, as I've said, cast a vote, have it counted, stay on the rolls. But what we are working toward and doing is training poll observers to be in precincts watching that vote happen, to make sure that voting rights are protected, to make sure that there are no problems in casting the ballot, right? So we do that in a variety of ways. We have poll observer trainings. We get out educational materials about how to vote, where to vote. So one of the resources that I want to point people to is fairfaxvotes.org, which is a great website where you can check your registration, you can find out where to vote in Fairfax County. We have 3 voting locations opening in just a couple days on September the 20th. And those locations will stay open all the way through November the 2nd. And then, of course, people can vote on Election Day, November 5th as well. And then we have 13 additional sites that open on October the 17th. So there's lots of places to vote. Fairfax County residents can vote in any of those locations. And so fairfaxvotes.org will direct them to the location that's most convenient for them. And it'll help them check their registration, get registered if they aren't registered to vote, and make their plan.
I also read that September 17th is National Voter Registration Day.
It is.
I'm gonna guess that's a relatively new holiday day or recognition, whatever, but maybe it speaks to your admonition that people need to check their registration, and if they're not registered, to get registered.
Exactly. Yeah, so National Voter Registration Day is an important day. In Virginia, you can register, though, all the way through Election Day. One of the great laws that we have in Virginia is that we allow folks to same-day register all the way until the election concludes on November the 5th. And that's a great opportunity. So even if you're somebody who thinks and waits to the last minute, as long as you're a citizen and an eligible voter to vote in Virginia, you can go and same-day register and cast your ballot. It will be a provisional ballot, that's what it will be called, but as long as you are eligible voter in Virginia, that counted.
Well, that's certainly good to hear, but I'm going to guess you still recommend that they have a plan to vote.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Yeah, remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice. Holy smile. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward.
I'm the awkward silence.
You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
We're back on Inside Scoop with Megan Challender, the chair of the Election Law and Voter Protection Committee for the Fairfax County Democrats. Let's continue. I note that a federal government shutdown could occur shortly due to congressional Republican desire to prevent non-citizens from voting. They're pressing for passage of the SAVE Act in a continuing resolution to fund the government. The SAVE Act is intended to keep non-citizens from voting, but as you sort of indicated, many experts contend that non-citizen voting is practically non-existent, and voting by non-citizens is already against the law. So are we seeing another example of the demonization of immigrant and minority communities?
Yes, that's exactly what is happening. So again, these efforts are really about suppressing the vote. We know that non-citizen voting is extremely rare. This attempt by Republicans is to raise a false flag and also to simply distract and undermine confidence in our democratic process. We know that across this, there was a report by the Brennan Center that said that across 42 jurisdictions, election officials who oversaw the tabulation of 23.5 million votes in the 2016 general election referred only an estimated 30 incidents of suspected non-citizen voting for further investigation or prosecution. 30 incidents among 23.5 million votes. Non-citizen voting is just simply not a problem. And what's more, the effort that you're talking about in that SAVE Act would require that individuals prove their citizenship. And I would say to you, how does one prove that you're a citizen, right? You'd have to demonstrate, you'd have to provide papers at your polling place, and many people don't have a valid passport, don't have a current copy of their birth certificate on hand. We should make voting easy. We should make voting fair. We should make it easy to access the ballot and have it count. We already have so many efforts in place to ensure that our eligible voters and our lists are clean, right? Our voter registration lists are checked in multiple ways. Voters have to affirm that they are citizens when they register. This is, again, it's not a real problem. It is simply an effort to intimidate immigrants and new voters, to undermine confidence in the election and the outcome.
Now, according to various media reports, the GOP, the Republicans, are engaged in major outreach to Latinos and African Americans. But the use of a non-existent issue to reduce minority voting seems to be a contradiction. What are your thoughts?
Yes, so they absolutely want their voters to vote, right? But they feel confident that even that they can suppress certain communities. Trump has said, for example, that he's going to have 100,000 poll observers, and that's where he wants to focus his time and energy because he can get out the vote, because he's a one-person army, whereas the Democrats are working through various mechanisms, including canvassing, voter registration drives. And this is really, again, it's about undermining our democratic process, about causing there to be a lack of confidence in election results. And we all should feel very confident that our election officials are working hard to make sure that the vote is valid and that the vote count is true.
Mm-hmm. Now, Fairfax County is very diverse. On our local level, is there cause for concern about this voter suppression in minority communities within our county? And if so, what is being done to address those concerns?
So yes, we know that there are local efforts to try to suppress the vote. There is a belief that if Fairfax County voters don't turn out, that they might be able to take Virginia. That effort is being pushed by our governor, Governor Youngkin. It's called the Virginia model because he was successful in winning the governor's race. That if they can suppress the vote in blue Fairfax County and Arlington and our other neighboring jurisdictions, that they can win the election overall. So what I would say instead is that, again, folks shouldn't feel fear about voting. They shouldn't feel intimidated. Instead, they should register to vote, check their registration, cast their ballot early, make sure that their voice is heard in the process, because we still have good, sound elections in Fairfax County, but the important part is to cast your ballot.
Okay. Have you or other members of FCDC that are concerned about this issue engaged with civic groups representing the interests of our minority communities? And are they working with you to ensure that everyone is able to vote?
Yes, so we are working with many local organizations in order to get out the vote. But I would also invite anyone who's watching to join us. If you're interested in helping to elect Democrats, go to fairfaxdemocrats.org and join us. Find an opportunity that works for you. Help us in canvassing neighborhoods, in calling voters, in texting out the vote, or acting as a poll observer to make sure that Virginia voting rights are protected.
Now, you mentioned poll observers. That might be of interest to members of our audience if that is something that they might wish to do. What's the process? How do they go about trying to be involved?
Yeah. So first, again, let me start with what exactly is a poll observer, right? So a poll observer is an unpaid volunteer who has to be appointed by a local political committee. So in this case, they might be appointed by the Democratic Committee, right? However, the Republicans certainly appoint their own poll observers as well. Poll observers go in, they do not interact with voters. They instead just observe the voting process and look for anything that might be going wrong in that process. And there are many common voting problems. I'm sure we'll talk about some of those as well. And poll observers report those problems to the voter protection team in Virginia. And if anyone who's watching also has a problem while they're voting, they can reach out to the Voter Protection Committee directly. They don't have to wait for a poll observer to interfere or to intervene and make that, not interfere. We never interfere as poll observers. They don't have to wait for us to intervene or to observe something. They can call us directly. So our phone number is 1-844-4VA-VOTE. That's 1-844-482-8683. And we answer that, I've answered that hotline many times as a volunteer. We can answer anything, again, from can you help me figure out how to check my registration, to I was just at this polling place in Mount Vernon and experienced a problem and I have a question about voting, or hey, my neighbor said that this happened, what's going on with this? We hear a lot of that, and so we're happy to take those questions and help ease concern too, because that's a lot of, I think many of us feel a lot of sense of wanting to make sure our vote counts, right? So a lot of the voter protection hotline sometimes too is just easing those concerns and making sure that people have their plan to vote and can move forward toward Election Day.
Now, in addition to the observers, there are also election officers who manage the overall processes that take place at the polls. I imagine they're supposed to be nonpartisan, but I also know that the lead election official is a Republican, because under the Virginia system, the party who occupies the governorship gets to appoint the lead election officers. And if I have this correct, the deputy or vice election officer is a Democrat. Now, if I have that correct, how does this really work in practice? We talked about one party that may be interested in suppressing the vote. How confident can we be that this sort of system is effective?
Yeah, such a good question. So let's take it piece by piece. So first of all, election officials in Virginia, they're paid employees of their local election office. And election officers are partisan, or at least they can have a political affiliation, so they can be Democrats and Republicans. The thing is that the local election office tries to make sure that there's an even split, that folks are political affiliations are evenly represented in every precinct. And you have it correct. The chief election officer in every precinct and voting location in Virginia at this moment is a Republican because the governor's a Republican. And the assistant chief at this point is a Democrat. But they are both sworn to uphold the rules and to make sure that people can cast their ballot. And what I will say is that our election officials do an excellent job. Simply because, you know, I think we all generally and genuinely believe in the democratic process. If you're helping to administer the election right there in place, you're really seeing democracy in action, and it's a really inspiring moment. Whether you're a poll observer who's volunteering or you're a paid election officer who's doing it as a job, we're there to make sure that democracy is okay. That being said, that there is sometimes rules are not followed correctly on occasion. Typically that's by accident, to be honest. I think that most election officers are not intending to not follow a rule or a law. That is one of the reasons we have poll observers, is just to make sure that all of those rules and laws are being followed all along the way. That if a mistake is made, that it's quickly corrected and the voter's allowed to vote and move on. So for the most part, I would say our election officials really do a great job, though.
Well, that is good to hear.
Yeah.
But I have another question concerning the representation of those election officials. Is there a problem with there being sufficient minority representation among the election officials at the various polling sites here in Fairfax County, that very, very diverse county that we just described?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have a lot of, particularly in Fairfax County, are English language learners. So all of our voting materials have to be translated into 5 languages. All of the signs have to be in 5 languages. And the elections office tries to hire elections officers who speak those languages. But I would say that there is definitely a need for more people who are diverse or who speak languages other than English to help as election officers.
Good. I hope our audience takes that into consideration. And if you're interested, maybe you should become an election official. It's time for another short break, so please stay tuned to this discussion. We'll be returned shortly with more Inside Scoop.
Hi. Hoping for a crisp breeze to help keep you alert. Oh, he took a sip of water too. That'll probably help.
You were probably gonna turn down the radio too, so you could focus, right?
Probably okay isn't okay.
Right?
If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend.
I think the water line is what really drove it home.
I blew on him.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that'll bring the trauma. Yeah, madness is what you demonstrate, and that's exactly how anger works and operates. Man, you gotta have love just to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love, y'all.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. When you practice what you preach, but you turn the other
Ma'am,
cheek.
you forgot your purse.
Oh, you don't know how worried I was. Thank you very much.
Hey.
Honesty. Pass it on.
Nice move, kid.
Donut?
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
When I was your age, I was just like you, fascinated by stars. But now I get to search for life in the universe. And who knows, maybe life is looking for us too.
So we're like aliens to them?
Yeah. Does anyone want to be a scientist now?
I do.
Awesome. We need more girls in STEM.
Maybe we can find aliens.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. Again, our special guest is Megan Challender, the chair of the Election Law and Voter Protection Committee for the Fairfax County Democrats. Let's continue our discussion. We spent a fair amount of time describing some of the challenges, but let's focus on the fundamentals of this year's process. Early voting starts on September the 20th. Where can people vote early in Fairfax County?
Yeah, so starting on September the 20th, there are 3 locations: North County Government Center in Reston, Fairfax County Government Center in Fairfax, and the Mount Vernon Government Center down in Mount Vernon. And voters in Fairfax County, if they're a resident of Fairfax County and registered to vote, they can cast a ballot at any 3 of those locations. So for example, if you live down in Falls Church and you work out in Reston, you can vote out in Reston. That is not the case though on Election Day. On Election Day, you have to cast your ballot at your precinct. So one of the benefits of voting early is that you can go to any location within your locality. So if you're a Fairfax resident, any location within Fairfax County.
What are the normal hours for the polls?
So it depends depending on the location. So the Fairfax County Government Center, the hours are business hours, whereas Mount Vernon and North County are, they go until 7 p.m. I believe they open at 1 p.m. And so they're good afternoon and evening voting hours at Mount Vernon and North County, whereas Fairfax County Government Center is more business hours. But the other way that a voter can vote is if they're an absentee voter by mail and they receive their ballot by mail, they can also return their ballot to any of those 3 government centers. And the Fairfax County Government Center has a 24/7 drop box, and so they can actually drop off their ballot 24/7 whenever they want, right outside the government center.
It's pretty convenient.
Pretty convenient.
If you do go to the government center, what type of identification is required?
Yeah, such a good question. So if you are casting your ballot, Virginia did repeal the voter ID law that many people were familiar with from several years ago. You still can show a voter ID, and many types are accepted. The most common that we see people use are, of course, a Virginia driver's license or a Virginia ID card, but there are lots of options for voter ID, including something like a utility bill is okay. A voter ID is not a photo ID, and it also doesn't actually have to have your current address. So for example, an expired Virginia driver's license that has an old address still is a valid ID for voting purposes. And the better news is that if you forget your wallet on the counter and you show up to vote in person, you still can cast a ballot as long as you sign what's called an affirmation of identity form. So the most common scenario that I see when I'm poll observing that this one comes up is somebody takes their dog out for a morning walk or is on a jog and jogs past their polling place or local early voting location, and they're like, hey, I'm just gonna go vote, but they didn't think to grab their wallet off of the counter, right? You still can vote. If you're a registered voter, you can sign that affirmation of identity form and cast your ballot. That affirmation says that you swear under the penalty of perjury that you are who you say you are. So it's a great way to make sure that you can still vote even if you don't have your ID with you.
I think I heard you say earlier that you could register right up until Election Day?
Yeah, that's correct. So in Virginia, again, we have same-day voter registration. So our voter registration deadline is October the 15th. So October the 15th is the deadline in Virginia in order to register and cast a regular ballot. But if you don't meet that deadline, if you don't remember to update your address from the last time you moved or something like that, don't worry. You can still same-day register all the way through Election Day, 7 p.m., November the 5th. As long as you make it in line by 6:59, stay in line, and you can same-day register to vote and cast what's called a provisional ballot. And again, provisional ballot can make people feel concerned, but as long as your voter registration is in good order, you're an eligible voter in Fairfax County in the precinct that you are in that moment, you are going to have that provisional ballot. You're going to be registered to vote and have that provisional ballot counted.
Interesting. Now, what are the requirements to vote by mail?
Yes. So again, I'm going to plug fairfaxvotes.org, which is a great website to go to in order to both register to vote and figure out how to request a vote by mail ballot. So vote by mail ballots will go out later this week when early voting starts on September the 20th. But you can request a vote by mail ballot all the way through October the 25th. I do encourage people, though, to not wait that long because, as we know, mail is a bit slow these days, right? So we know that mail in the June primary took on average about 6 days in Fairfax County. And if you're living in some other part of the country, for example, you're traveling or planning to be abroad for a short period of time, maintaining your residence in Virginia, and you still want to vote that absentee ballot, I encourage you to request the absentee ballot as early as possible to make sure that it can make it to you by mail and make it back to Fairfax County by mail.
Now, regarding voting by mail, what is necessary to fill out your ballot envelope correctly?
Yes, so this is a new change in Virginia and just in the last couple of years. So it's really important, especially for our voters who maybe only vote in presidential elections, which we know I vote every single election, but I know that not everyone is quite as diligent as I am. So this is a change and it's important to be aware of. And as you're talking to your friends and neighbors, I encourage you to talk to them about making sure that their vote by mail ballot is filled out correctly as well. So until 2 years ago, we in Virginia the voter had to sign the vote by mail envelope, and they had to have a witness sign the vote by mail ballot envelope. That was difficult for many people, especially those who live alone, especially during the pandemic, who were isolating. And so the law was changed a few years ago, and instead, starting in 2023, just last year, voters signed the ballot just as they always did, but instead of having a witness signature, they put their the year of birth and the last 4 digits of their social security number. And there is a privacy part of their absentee ballot to make sure that no one else can see that the last 4 of their social and year of birth and return it by mail. Or drop it off at one of those early voting locations or your precinct on election day. But the important part is that people make sure that they're filling out year of birth and the last 4 of social. We saw in 2023 an increase in the mistakes that were made on vote by mail ballots. So we really want folks to look carefully at those instructions because it is a change, and often, voters like familiarity. If you're used to one polling place and it changes, that's a problem, and this is another one, right? That vote by mail ballot did change.
Okay. What do you do if you misplace your ballot?
Yeah, excellent. So if that vote by mail ballot comes through the mail and your dog eats it, or it gets lost in the shuffle, can happen, gets lost on a desk or somewhere else. Don't worry, you still have options. So if you do have the ballot, but you make a mistake, that's the other thing that can happen, right? You still have the ballot, but you make a mistake, you can go to a polling place, one of those early voting locations or your precinct on election day. You can surrender your ballot and be issued a new one, and that'll be a regular ballot. But if you just lose it, dog eats it, whatever, you still can vote. You'll go to your early voting location, or you'll go to your precinct on election day, and instead of voting a regular ballot, you'll vote a provisional ballot, because everyone, of course, only gets one vote. The registrar's office has to make sure that that vote by mail ballot never shows up anywhere, and so or never shows back up at the office, right? So as long as there's never a second vote cast, right, that provisional ballot will count. But the voter who loses their vote by mail ballot, they'll cast their provisional ballot, and as long as the vote by mail, the one that was mailed to their house doesn't show up, it'll count.
Are there any differences in the requirements between the regular mail-in ballots and the absentee ballots?
So the difference there is subtle, right? So vote by mail is filling out that you want your ballot to be mailed, it's sent to your house, and you have options to return it. You can return it in the mail, or you can return it to an early voting location in your precinct on Election Day. Absentee voting or early voting is going to one of our early voting locations and casting your ballot in person. So there's no envelope, there's no last four of social and date of birth. You show your ID, you show up, you show your ID or sign the affirmation of identity form, cast your regular ballot, feed it in the machine, and get your I voted sticker, and you're done.
Absentee?
Yes, so absentee is vote by mail. Early voting is early voting at one of those locations.
All right, so voting by mail, absentee, basically they're the exact same thing.
They're similar, but yeah, the same.
All right. Now, in Fairfax County, we also have a fair number of our residents who may be in the military, or maybe they like work overseas for some reason. What can they do to vote?
Yes, so really important that they also make sure to get on this process early to make sure that their vote can count. So a great place to start, again, is fairfaxvotes.org to make sure to request their ballot. They can affirm where to have that ballot sent, and the ballot typically, it depends on where they are posted in the world, but it might be delivered to them electronically, but they do have to return it by mail. And so again, the most important thing is to get on the process as soon as possible and make sure that the ballot is returned in good time, because the election day, right, is November the 5th, but ballots must make it ballots that are mailed, they must be postmarked by Election Day, but they actually have to physically get to the election office by November the 8th. So it's not very many days after Election Day that it needs to make it to the election office. So I encourage putting that in the mail as early as possible.
Very, very wise. And again, I think you've also said that the Board of Election has worked hard to ensure that language will not prevent anyone from exercising their right to vote. So there's sufficient information in foreign languages in the county to allow people to vote. Well, it sounds like we have to take another break, but we'll come right back very, very shortly. So please stay tuned. Stay with us for more of our conversation with Megan Challender on voter protection here on Inside Scoop. Great conversation.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. Already posted it.
I got a creak in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But I was scared of but if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more.
It's a big responsibility.
Oh, it's huge. I know, it's huge.
And the salary.
Oh my god, yes. I mean,
Right?
like, I was about to move in with my parents, and right before, so this saved me.
I really believe in you, you know.
Thank you. It's nice to hear that from someone.
These are cool. Did you, what did you?
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to our discussion on voter protection with Megan Challender, the chair of the Election Law and Voter Protection Committee for the Fairfax County Democrats. We ended the previous segment talking about how we enable those who speak foreign languages, where English may be a second language, to give them the same rights to exercise their vote as anyone else. I understand that maybe they can get some assistance to help them cast their vote. Could you describe what they can and cannot do?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Fairfax County, we do have all of our voting materials are in 5 languages, which is great. But for anyone who speaks a language other than English, any English language learner is welcome to bring a person of their choosing with them to vote, to help them ask questions or understand the process. The person who comes with them, as long as that person's over the age of 15, will sign an affirmation saying that they didn't influence the vote and just were fair in the process. But that can be of great comfort to a lot of English language learners in making sure that they have somebody with them who speaks English. And that person can be a friend, family member, it can be a volunteer, somebody from their local community center, or it can be an election official who happens to speak that language. That's fine as well.
Great. For the members of our audience who may be from the disabled community, what provisions are made to enable them to cast their votes?
Yeah, so voter protection, sometimes we call it voter access because we really believe in having accessible voting, right? And that means access in lots of different ways. So voters who are seniors or have a disability of any kind, again, they have the right to curbside voting in Virginia. So curbside voting is available at every precinct and early voting location. A voter is allowed to pull up in their car and call the curbside voting number. The chief or the assistant chief or the provisional balloting officer will come outside and administer the voting process right there at that person's car. It's easy and convenient for folks who prefer to vote in their car. There are also other options though. The election officers, the chief and the assistant chief are also tasked and required to make sure that there is clear access from the parking lot. That means that there are handicap parking spots available. That means that there are wheelchair ramps. That means that there's a clear route into the voting booth. So they're not required to vote curbside or to do vote by mail. Again, it's voter access. They're allowed to vote how they choose, but curbside voting is the right of anyone with any disability or who's a senior. So that's great to know, and it's an easy way to cast a ballot.
Okay, thank you for that. You said your goal is to make voting easy, obviously to make sure that voting is fair.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure there are things that maybe the system could do better. Are there any proposals to strengthen voter protection or to make voting that much easier here in Virginia? And if there aren't, what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, one thing on my wish list would be that Virginia is one of the only states that still has widespread, not complete felon disenfranchisement. And I really believe in second chances. I think once you've served your time, there should not be a limitation on casting a ballot. And so I would love to see Virginia finally do away with felon disenfranchisement. I think everyone who is a citizen should have the right to have their voice heard in this democracy. So that's one thing that I would love to see change.
And has any particular legislator raised that issue?
Such an excellent question. I believe yes. I couldn't tell you which one, unfortunately, but yes, it has been brought up. It's one thing that I definitely believe in. And we also have had some good voting revisions in this last year. So like I mentioned, the revision to allow those who have any type of disability to curbside vote, that was a change that has just happened recently. And so we're happy to see that. It really improves voter access.
Thank you. Now, there was a lot of concern in the last presidential election about the possible manipulation of voting machines. Has that been raised in Virginia at all? And is there any reason to believe that voter machine manipulation is a credible threat anywhere in the United States?
So there is no reason to believe that this is a credible issue anywhere in the United States. What I can say is that in Virginia, every locality is required to do what's called logic and accuracy testing of all voting machines. So that just happened in Fairfax County last Friday, Saturday, and continued today to make sure that every single voting machine tabulates correctly, that all the votes are counted correctly, that all the write-ins are there, and that is the point of logic and accuracy testing. It is why it's required, right, to make sure that those machines are in good working order, they're ready to do their job, and I am not aware of efforts to undermine our local voting machines or to believe that they're, booping on us, but what I do know is that logic and accuracy testing exists, and also in Virginia we vote paper ballots. So we have every reason to feel confident in the results, and they can be checked very easily.
Another concern that maybe is more realistic is foreign interference in our elections. Many experts are citing that as a very real problem. Is there anything that can be done on the local level to counter any possible foreign interference in our elections?
I would encourage people to be careful about where they're getting their news, because I think one of the biggest risks to our democracy is disinformation, including AI that can manipulate you into believing that somebody's telling you information that they actually aren't, right? So we've seen Donald Trump, for example, tweet that AI images of Taylor Swift that don't really exist. So what I would encourage people to do really is to look for credible news sources, to go to the source. So in fact, we just had something on Nextdoor in Fairfax County where someone was saying that they thought they got a fraudulent letter in the mail about voting. It was a real letter from the registrar's office, right? But the way you know it's a real letter is to go to the source. If you're concerned about a letter you're getting and its legitimacy, if you're seeing something that doesn't make sense on social media, call the voter protection hotline, 844-4VA-VOTE, or call your local registrar's office and just ask them the question. They're happy to answer your questions about voting. We are happy to answer your questions about voting. And make sure you're getting news from credible journalists.
Would it be correct to say that in this day and age, maybe the Board of Elections maybe has to do a bit more outreach to convey those messages to the voting population, that they have to be circumspect about the information that they're receiving prior to our elections?
Yes, I do think our local registrar's office, they have a great social media presence. They produce really helpful videos on voting. So for example, if you want a video of how to fill out your vote by mail ballot that I was talking about before, they have one. And I think that, again, going to the source rather than relying on friends or neighbors or Nextdoor or other social media is really important.
Mm-hmm. What grade would you give the Youngkin administration with regard to how they've been managing these elections in Virginia?
Well, so Governor Youngkin issued an executive order about a month ago about non-citizen voting. And honestly, the executive order just recites the law. Only citizens can vote. That's been the law in this country since 1996. There really isn't a concern there. But what I have seen is then local Republican electoral board members try to spin that into something that doesn't exist. So I would not give him a good grade. I think that he is an election denier and tries to suppress and intimidate voters just like Donald Trump. And I really think that what we should be focusing on is making sure that voters have access and that they can vote.
Another carryover from the controversies concerning the last presidential election is the threat of violence against election officials. Unfortunately, we're seeing those threats throughout the country. What is being done here in Virginia to ensure that those who are willing to serve their communities as poll observers or election officials, that they're safe?
Yeah, excellent question. So that is another law that was passed in Virginia to strengthen already existing laws to make election officials safe in the voting booth while they're administering the election. And that also goes for voters as they're casting their ballot. It is the law in Virginia that you are allowed to vote free of intimidation, and that election officials should be able to work without being harassed or intimidated as well. Fortunately, we haven't seen a lot of that, and so that's one thing I really also want to say is that voting typically is very safe. While incidents like that make the news, rightfully, because that should never be the case, for the most part, actually, voting is pretty boring, and that's a really good thing.
I would agree. But if there are problems at a polling site and a voter calls one of these hotlines, do you have lawyers on call that are immediately ready to jump into action and respond?
Yes, we do. So our voter protection hotline and our whole voter protection team is here with you to make sure that your vote counts. And so if you have concerns, again, I encourage you to call us, 1-844-4VA-VOTE. We are here to make sure that everything goes smoothly, and also just that you have the information, again, that you need to vote. So you want to confirm a voting location or a voting hours, you can go to fairfaxvotes.org, or you can call us and we'll help you that way as well.
So we're about to wrap up, but quickly, how confident are you that we will see an election of the highest standard here in Virginia? Quickly?
I'm very confident. Make your plan to vote and get out there and make it count.
Excellent. We've run out of time. Let me thank Megan Challender for joining us tonight on Inside Scoop. It was an extremely enlightening conversation. And once again, go out there and vote and cast your vote, make your opinions heard.